Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 205, Lemos vs. Andrade. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. BetUS is offering our listeners an incredible 125% bonus on their deposit for UFC Fight Night Lemos vs. Andrade. Use code Sherdog and get $2,500 in extra money to make Fight Night even better. At BetUS.com, you can not only bet on each fight, but they have loads of awesome parlay bets to choose from. Bet live during the fights, and your winnings are paid within hours. Start the fight at BetUS.com. Use code Sherdog. As I said, my name is Ben Duffy, Sherdog Senior Editor. If you are used to watching these previews, it may seem strange to you that I am flying solo, and my head, shoulders, and upstairs living room are filling up more of your screen than usual. Keith Shillan is on vacation, so I am running this show solo. As I mentioned off the top, this show is sponsored by BetUS.com. It is also brought to you, not in the sense of any endorsement being implied or asked for, but brought to you in the most literal sense by Single Malt Scotch, in the sense that it is literally going to help me bring this content to you. Specifically tonight, it is Laphroaig Quarter Cask, definitely one of my picks for the most enjoyable whiskeys in its price range. If you're looking to get a single malt, you want to spend about $50, you're not looking to drop a whole Benjamin on something really special, Laphroaig Quarter Cask is spectacular. What is not so spectacular is the card that they are going to be calling UFC Vegas 52. On paper, this card is a bit of struggle. There are some fights of interest definitely at the top. Obviously, the Lemos versus Andrade headliner. It's going to answer some questions. We will find out whether Jessica Andrade is going to be on track to maybe getting back the 115-pound title she once held, or whether Amanda Lemos at 34 is finally breaking through as a legit title contender after certainly looking like a contender by the eyeball test. So there's good stuff up top of the card, but the first 6 fights on this card, I won't call it the undercard because, for one thing, the whole thing's just going to be on the same old ESPN Plus, and especially considering that we've had a couple fights fall off in the last day or so, it may get rearranged. But what currently is constituted as the undercard, the first 6 fights on the card contain exactly 0 fighters with a winning record in the UFC. In a couple of cases, that's not their fault. They're debuting fighters, and in some cases, Dean Barry, highly anticipated debuts, but nonetheless, not a single fighter on the undercard is over 500 in the UFC. Why does that matter? A fight's a fight. We're here to be entertained. Well, it comes to relevance. When you have 2 fighters fighting one another that are both on 3-fight losing streaks, just for example, they're probably fighting for their job. That fight matters a lot to them. When you have 2 fighters fighting each other that are on 3-fight winning streaks, there's probably a spot in the top 15 on the line if they aren't there already, and all of a sudden it matters more to the division as a whole, to the UFC as a whole, and to you and me as viewers. That's why I keep track of that sort of thing. So certainly some entertainment value to be had in the first half of this card, but in terms of divisional relevance, not a whole lot. The Shillan and Duffy cut list at the end of this thing may be lengthy and distinguished. We'll see. We'll see when we get there. Other things this card has in terms of just curiosities, there are 2 fighters on this card that have been away for more than 3 years in Tyson Pedro and Mike Jackson. There's at least one more that's been away for over 2 years. So a lot of these fights are going to be kind of hard to draw a bead on because we're basing it on tape that's 3 years old pre-COVID. I mean, there's 2 dudes on this card that haven't fought since COVID shut the world down over 2 years ago. So good luck to those of you who are betting. Good luck to the odds makers who have to try to track this. But I'm just going to say, let's dive right into these prelims. First up at UFC Fight Night 205 is a welterweight matchup between the debuting Dean Barry and Mike the Truth Jackson. Barry, the 29-year-old Dublin native, is 4-1 overall. He is making his debut. He fought most recently last December at Titan FC. He's a bit of a curiosity as far as Irish and UK prospects go, in that in his 5-fight career, he's only actually fought on the British Isles once, and ironically, that's his one career loss. Aside from that, he's fought at Titan, he's fought at Shamrock FC, UAE Warriors, all over the place, everywhere except for where he comes from, just kind of an interesting quirk about him. And generally, I like that in an up-and-coming prospect. He'll be taking on Jackson. The 37-year-old Houstonian is 0-1 with one no contest, both overall and in the UFC. His entire brief career has taken place in the octagon. That one no contest, of course, was a drubbing of Phil CM Punk Brooks at UFC 225 in June of 2018. That was later overturned when Jackson tested positive for cannabis. So, I mean, make of that what you will. But, you know, unless you think that cannabis made the man a better fighter, you know, he whooped up on CM Punk. That was his last fight. As I mentioned, it's been over 3 years since we've seen the man in the cage, and there was every reason to believe that we wouldn't see him again. UFC President Dana White was quite vocal in his displeasure with Jackson's performance against Punk, where Jackson basically spent the entire third round sitting on Punk's chest and slapping him up, but didn't get the finish. Dana let him have it, but here he's back. And in fact, he's been back because the UFC has been trying to make this matchup between Barry and Jackson at least since mid last year. And Barry had to bow out, I think, twice, either because of visa issues or injury. I can't remember which, but it's finally happening. It's happening this Saturday. And Barry is about as big a betting favorite as you will see in the UFC this year or any year. He is currently sitting there at minus 1,500 at betus.com. Jackson plus 750 on the comeback. I understand why the odds are what they are, because Mike Jackson, as he will cheerfully tell you himself, is not really a UFC level fighter. He's a guy that got in because they needed an opponent for CM Punk. That opponent ended up being Mickey Gall, but, you know, Jackson's kind of stuck around. He's a familiar face anyway, because by day he is an MMA photographer and journalist. He, you know, actually he doesn't anymore because it makes it a little weird, but he used to be cage side at a lot of UFC events, shooting the action. So familiar guy to bring back. And here they're clearly bringing him back to hopefully try and put over this highly touted prospect. Obviously, the UFC gets dollar signs in its eyes anytime a hot shit Irish kickboxer crops up. They are certainly hoping that Dean Barry will be the next Conor McGregor. And on the sheer eyeball test, there are some things that are reminiscent. You know, obviously, he is a striker by preference, and in fact, his only loss is a submission loss. His ground game is a large question mark, but even the way he sets up in an almost exaggeratedly wide karate stance like you are used to seeing from Conor McGregor, prefers to strike at range, dictate and control that range. He doesn't quite have the magic hand at it that McGregor did, especially on his way up, but the shared influences are obvious there. The interesting thing about this is that stylistically, obviously, he's a big favorite against Jackson for a reason. He's just, you know, a higher level fighter. He's a bigger guy. You know, I've been in the same room as Mike Jackson a lot of times, and Mike Jackson should be a lightweight. He's younger, but Jackson's own problem, generally speaking, is his ground game. You know, like Mickey Gall tapped him out in a hurry with little apparent effort. But, you know, Jackson, despite his short and fairly unsuccessful MMA record, you know, he has experience boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, and at least last I checked a couple years ago, he was actually undefeated across his scattering of striking matches. So if you're going to put him in a squash match, if it's a guy that's probably not going to try to take him down and is going to try to win a distance kickboxing match with him, that's actually about as favorable as you can get to Jackson. Much better this than him facing some, you know, burly 175-pound like ground wrecking machine. It's like, you know, he's taking on Dean Barry, not like Sean Brady or you know, Hamzat Shemaev or something. Having said that, Jackson is a slick boxer, good kickboxer, fast hands. You know, he's a bit of a showman on the feet. Not a whole lot of power. Again, probably should be a lightweight physically, and he's more of a touch him and keep moving guy anyway. He's not one that really sits down hard on his punches. That's going to be a contrast with Barry, who does generate a lot more natural power just out of his strikes. Here is where I will tell you that if you're familiar with the Shillan and Duffy previews at all, you know that while Keith is infamously hard on his hometown scene of Southern New England, almost like a stern parent, like treating his own kids like tougher than like the other kids, I'm the opposite, and I'm a shameless homer for Houston-based fighters. And in the case of Mike Jackson, more than that, like I consider the guy a friend. I see him around a lot. He's a good dude. So here's where I would tell you that this is probably going to end in a first or second round knockout for Dean Barry. Really just based on how badly he wants to step on the gas, and if I weren't a Houstonian and I weren't a shameless homer, I'd probably be saying, Barry by second round TKO. He'll win the first round handily, but not really go for the kill. Just get comfortable, get his round in, and then really turn the gas up in the second round. But of course, I'm not going to say that, and I'm going to say Mike Jackson wins by first round knockout. But please don't take that as betting advice. Next up at UFC Vegas 52, it is the light heavyweights. It is Poland versus Brazil. It is one championship versus PFL, at least one championship veteran versus PFL veteran. It is Marcin Prachnio versus Philipe Lins. Prachnio, the 33-year-old Pole, is 15-5 overall. He is 2-3 since joining the UFC as a standout, but not quite a champ in one championship. Like I say, 2-3 in the UFC, but it is a tale of two Prachnios. He lost his first three right out of the gate to Sam Alvey, Magomed Ankalaev, and Mike Slow Rodriguez. Could easily have been cut at that point, but it was mid-2020, and the UFC was not cutting anybody because of COVID. He's turned around since then with a pair of wins over Khalil Roundtree and Ike Villanueva, who appears a little further up the card. He'll be looking to extend that win streak to 3 straight against Lins. The 36-year-old Brazilian is 14-5 overall. He is 0-2 in the UFC, and that can only be described as a serious disappointment considering that he joined the UFC as the former PFL heavyweight champ. He was the heavyweight $1 million winner their first season, 2018, sat out all of 2019 with an injury, then was signed by the UFC, and in 2020, he fought twice, lost both times to Andrei Arlovsky and Tanner Boser, who also was scheduled to appear a little further up the card. We will see if that happens. He appears to be out of the Alexander Romanov fight, but has been out since June of 2020, and he is coming back at light heavyweight. So, again, all kinds of question marks hanging over the guy. 2-fight losing streak, almost 2 years away, dropping from, he was, around 230, 235 in his last heavyweight bout, looking to drop to 205 here and get things turned around. Odds on this one, fairly close, actually, considering all the question marks over Lins. Prachnio was only a minus 120 favorite. Only a 120 favorite. Lins, not quite even money, but he is minus 110 as the very slight underdog. I got to say, I'm surprised the odds aren't wider on this one. Prachnio is coming off a couple of decent wins at light heavyweight. Ike Villanueva, we'll talk about him in a little bit. He's a borderline UFC level guy at best at this point, but Khalil Roundtree was a legit win, and he's taking on a guy in Lins he's 36. He hadn't won a fight. I mean, the guy hasn't won a fight since December 2018. He hasn't won a fight in 3.5 years. He's trying to drop weight. He's coming off of a couple of lengthy injury layoffs. I'm surprised the odds aren't wider here. The route to defeat Marcin Prachnio seemed pretty obvious in his early UFC run. He's a little chinny. Catch him clean. You can put him down. You can hurt him. But he seems to have turned that around. He's taking on someone in Khalil Roundtree who he might as well be the Webster's dictionary definition of can put you down with one shot. And he lasted 3 rounds with him and won the fight. He took on then Villanueva, who pretty much the only thing that Villanueva like really does at UFC level is crack. He's a hard hitter. It was no problem. Linz certainly, I mean, that route to victory should be open to him. He's a former heavyweight, even if he did not exactly have plus power by heavyweight standards. But again, 36, dropping in weight. So that's two ways any speed advantage is going out the window. I just have a hard time picturing the 2022 version of Philipe Linz catching Prachnio clean. And I think in the other direction, Prachnio is probably going to get his licks in on Linz because Linz has been very hittable across his UFC run. I'm going to say here, don't bet based on my advice, but if you've got other people out there telling you that Marcin Prachnio is a hell of a value at minus 120, listen to them and add my little plus one to that, because I'm surprised the odds aren't wider, and I expect Marcin Prachnio to knock Philipe Linz out probably in the first round, honestly. Next up at UFC Fight Night 205 is a matchup between two bantamweights, both looking for their first win in the UFC. Also a matchup between two of the less meritorious nicknames in the entire promotion. It is Aori Qileng, the Mongolian murderer, and Cameron Kamchita Else. Aori Qileng, 28-year-old Chinese fighter, is 18-9 overall. He is 0-2 since joining the UFC out of Wulinfeng, which is pretty much China's top mixed martial arts promotion. Results haven't been so good since joining. He lost to Jeff Molina last April, then lost to Cody Durden in November, both by decision. He'll be taking on Else. The 30-year-old Englishman is 10-5 overall. He's 0-1 in the UFC. Hasn't fought since October of 2020 when he made his debut against Kyler Phillips. Got knocked out early in the second round with elbows. As losses go, that one's aged pretty well, as Kyler Phillips has become a top 15, if not top 10 fighter, and one of the more interesting prospects in that division. But a loss is a loss, and he will be trying to get it back here. Not favored to do so. The odds at betus.com are minus 240 for Aori Qileng right now. You can get Else plus 190 on the comeback. I think the real operative factor here, both of these guys are strikers by preference, but Else tends to go like a bat out of hell for about the first half of a 3-round fight, and then gasses out pretty badly. That's kind of been his pattern. Like in the Phillips fight, he started out well, but Phillips is probably a better fighter all over anyway. But things were started going downhill for him quickly. Aori Qileng has a little bit of that, but he is moving up from flyweight to bantamweight for this fight, and as flyweights go, I mean, he's a tall, lanky, rangy one. He looks like he has the body to fight at 135, especially if he puts on good weight. He's not some, 5'3" Joseph Benavidez type. He's a tall, lanky guy. And I just have the feeling that he's going to outlast Else and probably going to be able to put it on him once he does. He was never much of a finisher, even at the regional level in China, but he's gotten some stoppages, and they've usually been by an accumulation of damage. I could see him doing that to Else. Put me down for Aori Qileng by second round TKO. And again, even if Aori Qileng loses the first round, if Else is kind of sucking wind on the stool and Aori Qileng is just kind of drinking the water and listening to his coaches, I'm feeling good about his chances. I think he is going to pick up steam as the fight goes along while Else loses steam. So second round TKO for Aori Qileng for me. We now head to the light heavyweight division for a matchup between two fighters that are definitely in need of a win badly, one of whom has been out for a long time, and going to be an interesting one to catch on Saturday. It is Tyson Pedro versus Ike Villanueva. Pedro, the 30-year-old Australian, is 7-3 overall. He is 3-3 in the UFC. hasn't fought since December of 2018. He started in the UFC with a bit of a bang. Won his first 2 fights, both by first round finish, kind of in the light heavyweight division, which was and remains wide open. That got him thrust basically right into top 15 type matchups. They ended up being a bit too much for him. He's 1-3 in his last 4 and has lost his last 2 fights. He lost to Ovin St. Preux in June of 2018 after 3 minutes of really, really fun madcap back and forth scrambling, but he ended up on the wrong end of a straight armbar. Then in December of 2018, took on Shogun Rua and got knocked out in the 3rd round. He also hurt his knee in that fight, and that at least started the 3-year layoff, even if that's not been the entire reason he's been gone. But for that injury and whatever other reasons, he has been gone since the end of 2018. He is back. He is looking to snap that 2-fight losing streak, and he will have the chance to do it against Villanueva. The 38-year-old Houstonian is 18-13 overall. He is 1-4 in the UFC. Frankly, and I say this again, he's a Houstonian, and he's one that I know personally. I like the guy a lot, but he is definitely a beneficiary of the COVID era in the UFC. He's a guy that might or might not have attracted the UFC's notice in the first place. Just, he's strung together a couple of impressive wins over former UFC fighters in like Rashad Coulter and Roger Narvaez. But, he's in his mid-30s. But he got signed to fight on short notice. And basically his willingness to fight on short notice, his willingness to fight at light heavyweight or heavyweight, and the fact that he just legit moved out to Vegas and spent months there so that he could be available on a day's notice has led the Ike Villanueva UFC experiment to last for 5 fights. Frankly speaking, in his very best form, he's a borderline UFC talent at best. And that's kind of reflected in the odds here. Another big gap here, as Pedro is -600 at betus.com right now. Villanueva +400. I will say kind of the same as I said about the Dean Barry versus Mike Jackson fight. I understand why Pedro is such a favorite here. He's a much younger fighter. He, more athletic, has some good skills, but the style he brings, it's at least less menacing to Villanueva than it could have been, because Pedro, he's, Tai Tuivasa's brother-in-law. He's kind of got that, party hardy Australian slugger vibe, but he is not Tai Tuivasa. Tyson Pedro is a grappler. He wants to take you down and choke you out or wrench your limbs. And so far in Villanueva's UFC run, his real problem has been strikers who can take advantage of his speed disadvantage. That's not going to be Pedro. Like, Pedro's going to throw some kicks, and that does give me pause, since Villanueva's loss to Jourdain Wright was really started off by leg kicks that started bothering him right away. But Pedro's going to throw some kicks and either look to take Villanueva down or hope that Villanueva takes him down. Tyson Pedro has what I usually call, he has the fearless kicking game of a guy who secretly hopes you will take him down. He definitely has that. If Ike Villanueva were not Houstonian and I were not a shameless homer for local fighters, especially ones that I know and like personally, here's where I tell you that this is the perfect bounce back fight for Tyson Pedro. He'll break that 2-fight losing streak. He'll have the advantage even on the feet. Just, Villanueva is a bit of a plodder, slow feet. He has decently fast hands, but very hittable. And Pedro will probably light him up with some kicks, get him stumbling around, second-guessing himself, get him gun-shy with his punches, then take him down maybe late first round, early second round, and from there, advanced position, lock up an arm triangle choke, or take his back and choke him out, something like that. So that is what I would tell you, but here, of course, is where I tell you that Hurricane Ike will knock out Tyson Pedro in the first round. And once again, please do not take that as betting advice. UFC Fight Night Lemos vs. Andrade is more fun when you bet at betus.com. Use code SureDog and get an incredible 125% bonus up to $2,500. Andrade is the clear favorite, so get in now or even choose to bet on a win via TKO and increase your winnings. At betus.com, you can make the fights even more fun by betting throughout the fights. Start the fight at betus.com. Use code SureDog. Next up, it is the welterweights as Dwight Grant takes on Sergey Khandozhko. Grant, the 37-year-old New Yorker training out of Southern California, is 11-4 overall. He is an even 3-3 in the UFC since joining out of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series. He did lose his last time out. It was a split decision against Francisco Trinaldo at UFC Fight Night Costa versus Vettori last October in a frankly kind of dreadful fight. But he'll be looking to get it back against Khandozhko. The 29-year-old Russian is 26-6-1 overall. He is 1-1 in the UFC. But he is another one who's been out for a long while, hasn't fought since November of 2019, so almost 2.5 years. That last fight for him was a loss. It was a unanimous decision loss to Rustam Khabilov at UFC Fight Night, Magomed Sharipov versus Kader, which that should tell you right there how long it's been. Odds on this one, fairly close. Khandozhko -120 at betus.com, Grant -105. This is another matchup between odd, weird, or inappropriate nicknames. Dwight Grant, so this will be the second card in a row for the UFC where we've had a fighter who goes by the body snatcher. I can only assume that the people who call themselves this haven't watched any of the various film adaptations of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because the Body Snatchers were not tough. They were these weird pod people, aliens that stuck humans in cocoons while they slept. Not tough. I mean, unless he's naming himself that after the extremely excellent two-tone ska band of the early 80s, in which case much cooler, much tougher. But either way, Dwight Grant he's not a body snatcher. He doesn't snatch bodies. He catches bodies. We'll get to that in a minute. Sergey Khandozhko goes by Honda. It probably means something tough in Russian, but all I can think of is reliable Japanese automobiles, so I guess you could do worse. Grant, as I alluded to a moment ago, when he is on and when he's doing his thing, he is a wonder to behold and a bit of a force to reckon with. He is a big welterweight, like tall with muscle on him, got a wingspan to him, and he is an athletic and explosive guy. Like the cliche, the stereotype hangs very well on Dwight Grant. When he decides he wants to move, he moves with speed and power. The problem with Grant is how often he decides to move. He is deliberate to a fault, almost to the point of waiting to line up the perfect shot. I don't know if that's just a natural tendency for him or it's something a coping mechanism to manage his gas tank, because as I said before, he's a big welterweight. I suspect his weight cut is significant, and it is a problem that's gotten worse for him as he moves into his late 30s. All those elements to me kind of make me wonder if it's a strategy to conserve his gas tank. Just the Yoel Romero thing, where he'll take big sections of time off so that he can still throw 2 or 3 deadly strikes around late into a fight, even when he looks tired. So that might be what it is. But when he has lost fights, typically it's been just kind of, except for, when Daniel Rodriguez just caught him and knocked him out, it's been when he hasn't done enough to win rounds, and that one kill shot that he was looking for never came. It's why the Francisco Trinaldo fight was so dreadful, because Trinaldo, it was like a mirror match. Trinaldo has absolutely become an extremely deliberate striker as he's gotten into his late 30s and now even 40, and he's gotten less willing to employ his grinding grappling. So it was 2 guys staring at each other and throwing 6 strikes around for 3 rounds. It was a terrible fight. Against Khandozhko, I could see that happening. Khandozhko, he is a grinder. He's going to want to take Grant down in this fight. his loss to Rustam Khabilov was really just a loss to a stronger and more evolved version of the same fighter, at least at the time. Like, Khandozhko is, I mean, he's not a huge welterweight, but he's pretty good sized. And Khabilov had spent most of his career at lightweight. But nonetheless, if you remember Rustam Khabilov, he was the boring blue-collar Khabib. He had that kind of wrestling, and, you know, he finished a couple people or hurt people with slams, but, you know, just didn't have quite the plus athleticism and was just much more of a grindy wrestler. And he managed to do that to Khandozhko. Grant isn't going to try to do that to him. Grant's going to try to stay on the outside and just line up the perfect overhand right or straight left or head kick and try to ice him with a single shot. The question really just comes down to, is he going to be able to do that, or is he going to be able to land enough not quite perfect shots to win rounds while fighting off Khandozhko's attempts to crowd him, clinch with him, maul him against the cage, and hopefully get him down. Like several other fights on this card, there's a huge question mark just because Khandozhko has been out for so long. And, you know, he's still on the young side. He's only 29 now, you know, was, I think, still just 26 at the time of the Khabilov loss. That's a time span for a guy in his 20s where his game might have advanced significantly, or he might have just languished. We don't know. We don't know until he gets in there. I wonder, like, how his training situation has been affected, you know, by just the events of the last couple of years, COVID, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. You know, he at least was a teammate of Nikita Krylov. I don't know. Just too many question marks hanging over Khandozhko. I'm mildly surprised that he is the slight favorite here. I think that is a vote of no confidence in Grant as much as it is a vote of confidence in Khandozhko. Just, you know, people who've watched Grant's recent work are thinking, well, you know, whatever version of Khandozhko comes out, Grant's probably going to find a way to drop 2 rounds to him. I'm not seeing it. I am going to go with the slight upset here. I don't know if Grant catches him with something that's enough to just put him down, put him away, but I think Grant's going to hurt him, you know, hurt him a couple times, hopefully, you know, hurt him early and kind of give him something to think about, kind of blunt Khandozhko's impulse, which is going to be to just charge forward and try to get in phone booth range with him. But give me Grant by decision in this one in a slight upset. Next up at UFC Vegas 52 is a middleweight matchup between Jourdain Wright and Marc-Andre Barriault. Wright, the 30-year-old Californian, is 12-2 with 1 no contest overall. He is 2-2 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series. I say a veteran, not a signee from the series, because he did lose on the Contender Series. In fact, he got splattered by Anthony Hernandez in about 40 seconds. That was subsequently overturned to a no contest when Hernandez tested positive for cannabis. So that's the second fighter on this card who's had a fight result affected by weed usage. Come on, folks, just legalize it. I mean, I guess Nevada has at this point as far as competition goes. So we're most of the way there. Anyway. He is 2-2 since joining the UFC. He did lose his last time out, got blasted by Bruno Silva in about 90 seconds at UFC 269 last December. Prior to that, he knocked out Jamie Pickett in about 60 seconds last May. So he's alternated wins and losses since getting to the UFC. He's taking on Barriault. The 32-year-old Quebecois is 13-5 with 1 no contest since joining the UFC as a former 2-division champ, both middleweight and light heavyweights in Canada's TKO promotion. His 1 no contest was a win over Oscar Piechota that was later reversed to a no contest when Barriault tested positive for PEDs. So we're talking about actually performance-enhancing drugs there, not just drugs that make potato chips taste better. that's a shame because that was his first win in the UFC in 4 tries. He did open his UFC run with 3 straight losses. Could well have been cut, but just so happens that his fight with Piechota came, again, June of 2020, right when the UFC was not cutting anybody, and it turned out to be a good thing. Even though the win over Piechota was reversed, he then rattled off 2 more wins over Abu Azaitar and Dalcha Lungiambula before running into Chidi Njokuani this past February at UFC Fight Night Hermanson versus Strickland. Njokuani, of course, made his long-awaited and fairly anticipated debut and blasted Barriault in 16 seconds. So Barriault's looking to get it back here against Wright. Both these guys could frankly use a win. Barriault is the favorite here. He is minus 170 at betus.com right now, where Wright is plus 140 on the comeback. Neither of these guys has proven to be more than kind of borderline UFC level, just straight roster material. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you're just another guy in the UFC, you're one of the 50 or 60 best fighters in your weight class in the entire world. It helps that both these guys are middleweights. Middleweight needs bodies. They might well have been cut with the records they have, or in the case of Wright, maybe not signed in the first place in some of the more crowded weight classes, but it's middleweight, so they get a chance and they get a second chance. The problem here for me is that Wright, his nickname, and I probably should go into nicknames here. This is another matchup between 2 not great nicknames. The Beverly Hills Ninja is a terrible nickname. It makes me think, did you see the movie? Anyway, and then Marc-Andre Barriault is Power Bar. Power bars are terrible. He has a tattoo of bears on his chest. Maybe he meant to be Power Bear, and just from French to English, there was a little glitch in the translation or the transcription. If his nickname was Power Bear, I think that's a dope nickname. Anyway, Wright is the Beverly Hills Ninja, and if you hear that nickname and you don't immediately think of just, like obese Chris Farley doing awesome physical comedy all over the place, then you probably think of karate, and that's correct. Jordan Wright presents very much like a karate-influenced striker. He's got the bladed stance, the wide feet, reaches out with that, front kick and side kick, kind of like you would see from the Stephen Thompson or Lyoto Machida type. But by the eyeball test, it looks similar, but just in actuality, Wright is hittable in a way that great karate fighters who have made great adaptations of karate to mixed martial arts have tended to be really hard to hit cleanly. I mean, look no further than Thompson and Machida. Wright is hittable, and he himself does not deliver a lot of power coming back the other way. So it makes for kind of an interesting look, but he's just kind of like, a low-level opponent in a martial arts video game where he's got kind of an interesting style, but it's not that hard to beat. One of those types. And, against Barriault, I don't think he's going to have much chance to flex it anyway, because Barriault's going to want to crash the pocket, get his hands on him, mug him at short range, in boxing range. Barriault's turned out to be a pretty effective, like ugly but effective offensive wrestler, and has gotten some good ground and pound in. The Njokuani knockout of Barriault concerns me because Wright, generally speaking, doesn't deliver plus power, but he opens hot and he's caught some people pretty flat early and hurt him bad. I could see him doing that to Barriault, but when I pick Barriault in this, it's because I think that it may or may not be a fluke what Chidi Njokuani did to Barriault, but even if it's not a fluke, and that's just going to be a problem for Barriault going forward, I don't think Wright is the type of fighter who's very likely to duplicate that. Chidi Njokuani hits with a special kind of power, and in the absence of that, even if Wright gets his licks in early, I think Barriault is going to start rolling downhill on him. He's physically stronger, and he's going to realize that, he can dive in and probably get inside Wright's kicking range, can probably just land overhands on him, can probably force the clinch, might be able to dump him on the ground from there if he so chooses. But give me Marc-Andre Barriault by a pretty straightforward unanimous decision where he might even sweep all 3 rounds. Next up, it is a flyweight matchup between a couple of young men who entered the UFC with a good amount of hype, kind of stumbled out of the gate, and have righted the ship. It is Mudaerji and Manel Kape. Mudaerji, the 26-year-old from Sichuan, Western China, is 16-4 overall. He is 3-1 since joining the UFC, again out of WLF. Lost his debut by second-round submission to Louis Smolka. Since then, has come back with 3 straight wins, those coming against Andre Sukumtat, Malcolm Gordon, and most recently, last January at UFC on ESPN, Chiesa versus Magny, Zaruk Adashev, whom he beat via unanimous decision. He will look to extend that 3-fight winning streak to 4 against Kape. The 28-year-old Angolan by way of Thailand, who goes by Starboy, is 17-6 overall. He is 2-2 since joining the UFC as the outgoing Ryzen bantamweight champ. Lost his first 2 right out of the gate to Alexandre Pantoja and Matheus Nicolau. Has since won 2 straight, though he did miss weight for the first of those, a first-round knockout of Ode Osborne. But he came back in December at UFC on ESPN, Font versus Aldo, made weight just fine, and knocked out Zhalgas Zhumagulov in the first round. So he appears to have righted the ship and is a force to be reckoned with in the UFC flyweight division. Odds on this one do favor Kape. He is -170, Mudaerji plus 140 on the comeback. Again, this is a story of 2 fighters that have found some success after initially stumbling in the UFC, but there's a difference of degree here. Mudaerji, he's on a 3-fight win streak. There are 2 problems with it. One is that he's been fighting once per calendar year. I mean, he joined the UFC all the way back in 2018, and he's fought once in 2018, once in 2019, once in 2020, once in 2021, and it was all the way in January. And so here he's fighting in 2022, 14, 15 months from his last fight. Also, on that 3-fight win streak, Andre Sukumtat and Malcolm Gordon. I mean, Sukumtat is already expressly not UFC material. He's gone. Malcolm Gordon is on the chopping block every time he fights. And Zaruk Adashev is, it still remains to be seen whether he has any staying power. So you can argue that Mudaerji doesn't have a single win over a really UFC quality flyweight, certainly not like a top 25 or 31, and has been fighting very sporadically. Whereas Kape came in with all kinds of high expectations. Certainly, I was as excited for his signing as anyone the UFC has picked up in probably 3 or 4 years. And just, he lost 2 right out of the gate, but in hindsight, losses by decision to Alexandre Pantoja and Matheus Nicolau have turned out pretty forgivable. Pantoja's a top 5 guy. Nicolau's at least a top 10 guy. And Kape was right there against both of them. He blasted Ode Osborne, then embarrassed himself by asking for a bonus when he had missed weight. DC had to explain to him, you can't do that. But against Zhalgas Zhumagulov, he finally put it all together. Zhumagulov is another fellow highly touted guy that I think is going to have staying power in the UFC. Kape blew him away and made weight for this. If he has the weight cut down and he has the octagon jitters and the rust from having missed all of 2020 out of the way, he's a problem. He's still just 28 years old. And the thing I loved about him in Ryzen, and the thing that made me so excited for him to join the UFC, is that he's one of those fighters who blends actual competitive excellence and highlight reel performances, and has stayed that way. Like, he won the Ryzen bantamweight title without compromising his style. He is a powerhouse striker, a little too much of one. If he has any faults, he overswings, overcommits to a lot of his punches and kicks. It it hurts his gas tank. It leaves him vulnerable to counters. But when he's hitting, he has power like almost nobody at 125. I would say only Davis and Figueiredo has better one-shot power at 125 than Manel Kape does. And even that is arguable. Like, I think they're probably right neck and neck as two of the hardest hitting pound-for-pound fighters in the entire sport. All of that spells bad news for Mudaerji, because Mudaerji is a patient, like, counter striker. He waits for his opponent to go first, and he gets hit for his trouble. His ideal striking performance is, like, throw a couple feints, draw his opponent out. Maybe he actually gets hit, takes a hit to give one back, and hopes to give something back that's harder. He's not going to be able to do that against Kape. And I think Kape's going to catch him. I think Kape's going to just knock him out. The difference in the level of competition they've been fighting is going to be obvious in this one. The difference in power and speed is going to be obvious. Give me Manel Kape in this one by another first-round knockout. It'll be his third first-round knockout in a row. And if he gets 3 first-round knockouts in a row and, he makes weight without incident again, it's time to start talking about Manel Kape, as at least a top 10 fighter and as maybe a title contender sooner rather than later, once, there's a lot of traffic ahead of him that needs to decongest itself, but he's positioning himself to maybe be in the title picture by the end of this year or early next year. Good stuff for Manel Kape. Flyweights take the cage next, as it is Maycee Barber versus Montana De La Rosa. Barber, the 23-year-old Colorado native, is 9-2 overall. She is 4-2 since joining the UFC out of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series. She did win in her last outing. It was last July at UFC on ESPN, Sandhagen versus Dillashaw, where she took a frankly controversial split decision over fellow young up-and-comer Miranda Maverick. That put the skids on a 2-fight losing streak for Barber, which had come against Roxanne Modafferi in one of the biggest upsets of 2020, and then Alexa Grasso in February of 2021. So by hook or by crook, she is coming off a win, and she will look to keep that momentum going against De La Rosa. The 27-year-old Elevation Fight Team product is 12-6-1 overall. She is 5-2-1 since joining the UFC out of the 26th season of Dana White's Contender Series. Out of the 26th season of The Ultimate Fighter. She is coming off a win in her last outing as well, only in her case, there is no real controversy about it, as she knocked out Ariane Lipski in the second round. That was at UFC Fight Night Rosenstrike versus Sakai last June. That put things right for her after a draw against Mayra Bueno Silva and a loss to Viviane Araújo in her last 2 UFC appearances. Odds in this one favor Barber. She is a -200 favorite at betus.com. De La Rosa +160 on the comeback. It's interesting for me to see the different routes these two women have taken to get where they are and to meet in the cage this Saturday at UFC Fight Night 205, based kind of on the perception and the hype behind them on their way up. I mean, in the case of Barber, if you've been following this sport for any appreciable amount of time, even just 2 or 3 years, it's probably shocking to you, as it is to me, that Maycee Barber is still only 23 years old. It just seems as though she's been around for long enough that she would be older than that by now. But she was barely 20 years old, just like a couple months from her 20th birthday when she fought on the Contender Series. She was already a highly hyped prospect. If you followed any of her backstory, she was trained in mixed martial arts specifically, not, karate or wrestling or jiu-jitsu, but like trained as a mixed martial artist from a small child by her father, along with her brother. They both kind of came up through the same training regimen. And she was a prodigy in every sense of the word. When she was signed out of the Contender Series, made some hubristic predictions, wanted to be the youngest UFC champ ever. And, for a little while there, looked like things were going her way. She won her first 3 fights won her first 3 fights out of the Contender Series. All 3 of them were TKOs. All 3 of them were in the first 2 rounds before running into Roxanne Modafferi. And the Modafferi fight, yeah, Barber hurt her knee in that fight. It certainly hampered her performance, but just also a different version of Barber, one with different instincts or a broader skill set, more weapons to go to, might still have won that fight. But instead, that was all Modafferi, one of the toughest and wiliest veterans in the sport in any weight class of any gender, needed to spring the upset over what I think was like a minus 900 favorite in Barber. Bounced back from that, and she's not really been the same since. The fight against Alexa Grasso, she seemed to kind of try to turn over a new leaf in terms of her approach, her game plan, her fight IQ. But when it started going badly for her, she reverted to form. Didn't matter. She lost the fight anyway. And then the Miranda Maverick fight last July, again, it goes down as a win, but just about every observer I know of thought Maverick won that fight. You go to MMAdecisions.com and it's overwhelming for Maverick. So Barber's in a bit of an odd place. And in a lot of ways, she is still the same fighter she was in 2018. She's not a physically huge 125-pounder, but she's strong. She is an excellent athlete. She is fast. She's explosive. She hits hard. And on her way up, she presented as kind of a, small female Diego Sanchez type. And I'm not talking about like late career, worn out, like Weird Diego. I'm talking about young, Weird Diego, where, yeah, he was a good wrestler, good grappler, a serviceable striker, but what made it all go was like his plus athleticism and his aggression. Like on his way up, through Tough 1 and the early parts of his UFC career, he came forward like swinging hard, would look to take the fight down, as soon as possible if he could, and would go to work with nasty ground and pound. He was just kind of like a Tasmanian devil on the ground, would look to take the back and just pound people out or choke him out. Barber, if not in all the nuances of the skill set, in the approach on her way up was very much similar to that, but she's been out of her comfort zone ever since she started running into fighters of a level that just won't work on. Like, just, it's not the Hannah Cyphers of the world anymore that she can just kind of run over. Again, against Alexa Grasso, she tried to take a bit more of a composed approach, and she just sort of got outstruck at range by a better kickboxer. When she went wild in the 3rd round and just kind of reverted to old Maycee Barber, well, Grasso is bigger, stronger, and just that wasn't going to work on her. It leaves her in an interesting spot against De La Rosa. And here's where I'm going to circle back to that whole 2 different paths to get here, because Montana De La Rosa was super unheralded on her way up. The first I remember of her was I don't think it was Invicta, I think it was LFA, where she took on Mackenzie Dern. And what a horrible matchup if you're Montana De La Rosa. Because, De La Rosa is pretty big and strong for the weight class, and a good wrestler and a good grappler. And then she's taking on the best grappler in the world in her weight class. I remember basically the end of that fight looked like 3 attractive women playing Twister. Like if you watch the end of that, like, the game Twister with like, all the dots on the ground. Yeah, it looked like three women playing Twister. It was brutal. De La Rosa, if Barber kind of had this kind of groomed for greatness, chosen one thing coming up that clearly infected her with a certain amount of overconfidence. I mean, De La Rosa is 27 years old, and I think she has like a 12-year-old kid. It's to the extent it matters, like having a kid when you're like a junior in high school, for a lot of people, that's a route to, all your dreams are out the window and you're probably going to end up, working at the Circle K. And instead, Montana De La Rosa is one of the 20 or 25 best people in the world at something, being a flyweight mixed martial artist. Pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, she came up unheralded, has really just kind of gradually, she hasn't broadened her skill set too much. She's still pretty much the same fighter she was in the Dern fight. She's just a better, more refined version of it. Montana De La Rosa at her best, she's not super fast. It's like she's tall and has good reach, and she's a willing striker from outside, but, she's slow compared to a lot of flyweights. They tend to be able she tends to get outstruck by quicker women, more polished strikers, but she's a good offensive wrestler, and she's a good grappler on the ground. She's willing to throw ground and pound. Even though Barber is a 2-1 favorite here, I'm having trouble picturing her clear routes to victory. I don't think Barber's just going to be able to come forward and scoop up De La Rosa and slam her down. I think De La Rosa is going to be visibly larger and probably have a strength advantage once they get their hands on each other. Barber could certainly come forward and nail her with some of her hard overhands. Like I say, De La Rosa is hittable. People can get inside on her that, she does have a reach advantage on. That's certainly something Barber could do. But I don't think Barber's going to be able to just come in and hit her with something hard enough that it puts her on skates and starts everything rolling downhill. I think Barber is probably going to land some shots on the feet, but De La Rosa is going to be able to hit her back some, probably force clinches. From there, I'm interested to see if Barber tries to bring it to the ground or whether, she just wants to shuck her off, keep it standing, whether she wants to try to hurt her in the clinch. If they do go to the ground, I think there's a world of difference, whether it's Barber taking down De La Rosa and putting her on her back or vice versa, because De La Rosa is not super effective off her back. She's much more comfortable in scrambles and certainly when she ends up in top position. But all this, just the long way around to saying, I think Montana De La Rosa is going to win a decision here. And I think it's just going to be another back to the drawing board moment for Barber, who, again, at 23 has all the time in the world to turn this around. But I think it's going to be a frustrating night for Barber and another good night at the office for Montana De La Rosa. Give me De La Rosa by decision. We head now to the featherweight division and a matchup between groovy Lando Vannata and Charles Air Jourdain. Vannata, the 30-year-old New Jersey native, is 12-5-2 overall. He is 4-5-2 since joining the UFC on short notice back in 2016. He won his last time out. It was a split decision win over Mike Grundy at UFC 262 right here in Houston last May. That also represented his return to the featherweight division after a lengthy run at lightweight. He'll be taking on Jourdain. The 26-year-old fighter from Quebec is 12-4-1 overall. He is 3-3-1 since joining the UFC as another exponent from Canada's TKO promotion. He has more or less alternated wins and losses with that single draw thrown in there ever since he joined the UFC back in 2019. But he did win his last time out. That was last December at UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Dawkins, where he took a dominant unanimous decision over Andre Ewell. Odds on this one slightly favor the Canadian. He's minus 135 at betus.com. Vannata plus 105 as the slight to moderate underdog. These are two ballsy guys. I mean, my criticism of Lando Vannata for a while has been that he's gotten more mileage out of not even a win, but just like a couple of good moments in a loss than just about any fighter I can think of in the UFC. I mean, he's 4-5-2 in the UFC, below 500, but, for having Tony Ferguson in a bit of trouble 5 years ago, like the Lando Vannata groovy UFC experience continues. But that doesn't do justice to the balls on the man, because he stepped up on short notice to fight Tony Ferguson. And Tony Ferguson, he may not have been the best fighter in the UFC at that time, although he was certainly like up there, but he was probably the scariest guy in the UFC. And Vannata came in, probably a natural featherweight, fearlessly, and had Ferguson in some trouble before losing in the second round. So hats off to him. And he's got a kindred spirit in Charles Jourdain, because you may recall that just a few months ago, Jourdain offered to step up on short notice and fight Ilia Topuria, one of the scariest undefeated prospects in the UFC. And Jourdain shows up, and of all things, Topuria has to pull out for some reason, and Jourdain goes ahead and makes the weight cut anyway and just weighs in at the hotel lobby and flips the bird. Like, my hat is off to Charles Jourdain. This should be a fun one. This is kind of your obvious candidate for fight of the night. Like, the UFC booth is probably going to say some stuff when Clay Guida takes the cage, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Lando Vannata versus Charles Jourdain is your obvious fight of the night pick in advance here. I would normally complain about the nickname Air Jourdain. It's just too easy a pun to make, but I'll forgive it because Air does kind of describe his striking game. It is a high-flying striking game. He's never met a flying or spinning strike he didn't like. And I wouldn't say he's a slow starter, but he's a deliberate starter in that he takes the first half a round to occasionally the whole first round, just kind of getting loose, getting the blood flowing, zeroing in on his opponent a little bit in terms of the range and timing. And then he starts uncorking like the long high kicks, the flying knees, the spinning stuff. When he buckles down, he actually is a good, solid, fundamental kickboxer. He throws in combination. He's good at mixing kicks in with his punches, throws hard kicks to all levels. But, you know, you're here for the fun, for the high-flying trapeze act, and he brings that. And he's got a guy that's going to oblige him in Vannata. Vannata is a fast starter. He comes out like a house on fire. It's what stopped, you know, didn't stop, but, you know, stymied Tony Ferguson and had him hurt and had him in some trouble early in their fight, is that he was not expecting this, you know, balding, unheralded guy from New Jersey to just come out and put it on him. But that's what Lando Vannata does. It's what he's going to do here. And he's not quite the high flyer that Jourdain is, even though he's very happy to throw funky stuff. That's always been part of his bag of tricks. He's got the spinning stuff. He's also, you know, a bit more of a willing grappler than Jourdain is, more willing to mix in takedowns, more than happy to oblige his opponent with a ground fight if he wants to take it there. I was concerned going into the Grundy fight that Vannata's gas tank would be a problem, just, you know, dropping a weight class after age 30 with his high output style, you know, the kind of furious pace he likes to put on. But, and I've said this before, there have only been a couple of times in my entire career of covering mixed martial arts live that I've changed my pick on a fight based on interacting with a fighter during fight week. But when Vannata was down here and fought Grundy in Houston in his return to featherweight, I was just, you know, you run into fighters constantly throughout the week. You're coming and going from the same press conferences, the same weigh-ins. You bump into him at the hotel, you know, looking for just any signs that he was miserable. Because, you know, fighters can't hide it when they're having a shit weight cut. Like, if you're face-to-face with him, you can tell. But Vannata just was so at ease, gave off so much positive energy, and just, he was happy. He was happy in a way that just someone is not, who is thirsty and hungry and knows they're going to have to, like, put on, you know, they have to get in, like, the little foil porta-sauna as soon as they're done with their interviews. And based on that, I flipped my pick to Vannata over Grundy, and it played out. So knowing now that Vannata has the weight cut mastered, you know, to back down to featherweight, I feel better about him in this fight, but I still am leaning Jourdain. I think Vannata's best chances to win this fight are either early, just come out, do his furious routine, catch Jourdain with something early, you know, that would be possible, or, you know, flexing his surprisingly good gas tank and hard pace and win this going away, as Jourdain starts to slow a little bit, because Jourdain does, he does get tired late in fights. But I think those are the outside chance. I'm not predicting a finish here, but I think Jourdain's going to get the better of a wild, high-flying kickboxing match. So give me Jourdain by decision here. Again, put me down for this kind of being the obvious fight of the night pick. But yeah, Charles Jourdain gets it done in a fun one. Next up at UFC Fight Night Lemos versus Andrade is a lightweight matchup between Guida and Claudio Puelles. Guida, the 40-year-old Chicagoan, is 37-21 overall. He is 17-15 in a UFC career that goes all the way back to 2006. Yeah, he's 17-15 in a UFC career that goes all the way back to 2006. He is coming off a win. It is a second round submission of Leonardo Santos last December at UFC on ESPN, Font versus Aldo. Prior to that, he had lost a split decision to Marc Madsen last August. He'll be taking on Puelles. The 25-year-old Peruvian is 11-2 overall. He is 4-1 since joining the UFC. He joined the UFC all the way back in 2016, lost his debut. I mean, he was just like a 19, 20-year-old kid at the time. Took a year and a half off, came back in 2018, and has won 4 straight, even if those have been spread out over a couple of years with a couple of lengthy layoffs in between. In recent memory, he beat Jordan Levitt last June at UFC Fight Night Rosenstrike versus Sakai by unanimous decision, and he beat Chris Gritzmacher by third round knee bar submission last December at the same Font versus Aldo card that Guida competed on. Guida, the Carpenter, the slight favorite here. He is -120, Puelles -110 as the slightest of underdogs. Guida, it's a weird thing to me because he is what he is, obviously. He is, he's been in the UFC for over 15 years. He's got, he's going on 35 fights in the UFC. His job is safe, whether he wins or loses. He's one of the UFC's just all-time kind of reliable mid-card action fighters. But I think the narrative about him has always been weird to me, because in his prime, I say his prime, he's never really been a top 10 guy. He's always, he's won about as many as he lost, won a few more than he lost. But, during his prime, the UFC announcers, Goldie and Rogan at the time, could not stop talking about how exciting he was. Every fight's an action fight. I always thought that was a little overstated. I always thought he bounced around a lot and flopped his hair all over the place and threw a lot of punches at air. Some of his fights were exciting, some were boring. In terms of excitement, he was just another dude to me. So I always thought that part of the Guida thing was very much overrated and overstated. But then other things were kind of understated. I haven't, a lot of people don't seem to touch on, what a good wrestler he is, offensively and defensively. He's been out wrestled a few times in his career, but not many times, and only by the very, very good. In his prime, one thing he absolutely did have was probably the best cardio in the sport. Whether he always put all of those calories to the best possible use was arguable, but just in terms of how much exertion he could do, it was the definition of weaponized cardio. He was always the less tired guy than his opponent. And in most cases, he could push at a pace that would make them tired and win him the fight. I mean, he was the less tired guy in a fight against Nate Diaz, who himself is a legendary cardio guy. That's all you really need to say about that. Now at age 40, he still has plus cardio for the division, which is saying a lot. It's no longer the legendary cardio, but it's still better than most of his opponents, and no better way to exemplify that than by his last outing, where he beat Leonardo Santos. Now, obviously, in Santos, they managed to find one of the only guys in the division that's actually older than Guida. But nonetheless, Santos, was and is a physical specimen and absolutely put it on Guida in the first round. Might easily have finished him, but Guida survived, came back, Santos started flagging, and Guida put him away early in the second round. So he still has the ability to employ that weaponized cardio against a lot of UFC guys, even at this late stage of his career. He's never been more than an average striker. Throws basic combinations, does throw in combination, doesn't kick a whole lot. But I don't think it's going to matter here because his opponent, Puelles, is going to want to get this thing to the ground at all costs. Puelles, he's a big, long, lanky, lightweight, not too skinny. Like he has some muscle, he has some power on him, but he is, he's a grappling specialist. What you can say about him is he's on the 4-fight win streak. Part of his problem, kind of the same as Mudaerji, he hadn't fight very often. He fought once in 2018, once in 2019, not at all in 2020 or the first half of 2021, and then finally got in 2 fights in like June and December of last year. Hopefully he's back for good. Because he is still just 26 years old and has a lot of upside. You can take issue with who he's beaten, like Felipe Silva, Marcos Mariano, not great wins. Jourdain Levitt, Jourdain Levitt has his flaws, and there are obvious routes to victory against him, but the way Puelles beat him means something, because he beat him by being completely unafraid to go to the ground with, one of the more dazzling submission specialists in the UFC, and Puelles had no fear of him and more than held his own on the ground there. And then against Chris Gritzmacher, who is perfectly capable of taking care of himself on the ground, he actually submitted him with something like sassy. It was a nasty knee bar. If Puelles can get Guida down, I think he can actually give him problems. Guida has been historically difficult to submit, but I see Puelles as a kind of guy who could do it. Just has the combination of size, strength, positional soundness, and an arsenal of creative techniques that he could give Guida trouble. And even if he isn't able to tap him out, or if it doesn't come right away, making Guida work on the ground cuts into his cardio advantage. Like, Guida will do a bouncing hair kickboxing match with you all day long, and he's going to get the better of it, or at least get the better of it in terms of like endurance and stamina. But, people that have wrestled him and grappled him and made him defend himself on the ground, that depletes his gas tank a lot faster. There's a reason why grapplers and wrestlers, seem to get strikeritis in their 30s and, as they push 40. There's a reason that guys like, Rampage and Fedor just turned into headhunting boxers, where in their 20s they were slamming people all over the place and ground and pounding them. It's hard work to be on the ground. Even though he's the slight underdog here, I like Puelles in this fight. In order to win this fight, I think Clay Guida is going to have to do a mid-range kickboxing match the whole time and keep Puelles from taking him down. And I think that's going to be tough for him. He's going to be facing a younger, faster guy with better reach. Puelles is not a complete dummy on the feet. Give me Puelles by decision here. I'm not going to pick him to tap out Guida, although I wouldn't be shocked if he does. But I think he's going to be able to get him to the ground. If not in the first round, maybe in the second and the third. And from there, it's going to turn into lengthy ground exchanges where Puelles is kind of... It's not just that he has top position, but he's threatening to take the back. He's threatening with chokes. He's making Guida work to defend himself from one moment to the next, rather than Guida thinking about getting back to his feet or thinking about any offense of his own. So, maybe not a breakout performance for him, but a real good name to have on the resume going forward as he extends his UFC winning streak to 5. Who are you betting on at UFC Fight Night Lemos versus Andrade? Can Lemos beat the odds and defeat Andrade, or is the former champ winning by TKO a given? Get your bets on this weekend at BetUS.com. Use code SureDog and get a 125% bonus. BetUS.com has been taking bets for well over 25 years, and there's a reason it's the #1 UFC sportsbook. With more betting options, live betting at games, BetUS.com is your new home for UFC betting. Start the fight at BetUS.com. Use code SHERDOG. That brings us to the main event of UFC Fight Night 205. It is a strawweight matchup between Amanda Lemos and Jessica Andrade. Lemos, the 34-year-old Brazilian, is 11-1-1 overall. She is 5-1 since joining the UFC as the former bantamweight champ in Jungle Fight, and like several other fighters on this card, like Manel Kape, like Mudaerji, like Claudio Puelles, she lost right out of the gate and has been great ever since. She lost her debut to Leslie Smith, and it was at bantamweight. She has subsequently cut weight, but she's won 5 in a row since then. Beat Miranda Granger, which was at flyweight, then has won 4 straight at strawweight over Mizuki Inoue, Lavinia Souza, Montserrat Ruiz, and Angela Hill, whom she defeated by split decision last December at UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Dawkins. She'll be looking to keep that streak going and thrust herself into the title picture against former champ Andrade. The 30-year-old Brazilian is 22-9 overall. She is 13-7 since joining the UFC as a 20-year-old, extremely raw bantamweight prospect. I say 13-7, but what you really want to know is she is 3-3 at bantamweight. She's 2-1 at flyweight, and she is 7-3 at strawweight, where she is fighting once again now. Andrade is the moderate favorite. She's minus 180 at BetUS.com right now. Lemos plus 150 as the underdog. I don't know why Jessica Andrade came back down to strawweight, but I'm glad she did. Obviously, the path back to a title shot will be a dicey one if Rose Namajunas is the champ, and certainly if Weili Zhang is the champ. But Andrade, at just 30 years old, probably has time to kind of hang around, win some fights, stay in the title discussion, and just be there and be available. But obviously that only works if she keeps winning. Here, this is an interesting style matchup because these women have so much in common. I mean, they're both former bantamweights, obviously, who were short for bantamweight, and frankly, are both short for strawweight even. I think they're 5'2" and 5'3" respectively. They're both stocky women, especially Andrade, obviously. They both have outstanding raw physical tools, with rudimentary but developing skill sets behind them. But in all the ways that they're similar, I think Andrade is just a more, a greater example of it. They're both extremely physically strong, but Andrade is faster and more explosive than Lemos is. And I said that Jessica Andrade is 7-3 at strawweight. Her 3 losses at strawweight: Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and again, that was all the way back in 2017. That was a good bit earlier in Andrade's development, but Jędrzejczyk was much larger, or at least much taller, had much better reach, and was a much, much, much more refined striker. Obviously, Joanna Jędrzejczyk was a world-class Muay Thai fighter, and back at a time when Andrade's basic approach to striking was to run straight at her opponent like throwing haymakers. It was like a matador at a bull. Jędrzejczyk used her outstanding lateral footwork, her jab, and her kicks, and just busted Andrade the hell up for 5 rounds. It was ugly, and it was one-sided. So that's one. Weili Zhang lamped her in 40 seconds. Zhang is going to do that to some people. Zhang, much like Andrade, is a physical powerhouse who hits like a truck. But if they fight 10 times, maybe it ends in 10 first-round knockouts, but it's not going to be all 10 for Zhang. It's going to, there's going to be a split there. And then Rose Namajunas in their rematch, because, of course, Andrade won the first fight by spiking Namajunas on her head in the second round. And Namajunas won by split decision, in a hard-fought fight. And Namajunas is one of the most dangerous, well-rounded fighters in the sport, like, let alone the division, and is taller and is an outstanding athlete herself. So that's what it takes to beat Jessica Andrade at strawweight. You either have to be a dreadful style matchup, someone who hits like a truck, or an incredibly well-rounded and improving fighter who is a pound-for-pound talent herself. Like, those are your options. Lemos is one of those. Like, Lemos does hit like a truck, but I don't think she's on Weili Zhang's level in terms of that skill set. I mean, if one of these women plunks the other, I think it's more likely that it's Andrade. And I think that's what happens here. Lemos has been a great story. And, I mean, narrative, storyline-wise, it'd be great if Lemos won because she is 34 to Andrade just being 30. So if she's going to make a run in this division, it needs to be sooner than later. But I think this is a rough look for Lemos in that it's kind of a mirror match, only against just a slightly more evolved version of the same basic fighter as herself. Both of these women are very aggressive. Both of them are fast starters. I could see this being a brutal first round. And because of that, I'm actually picking this one to end in the first round. Give me Jessica Andrade by first round knockout. And that's not because I think Andrade is 10 times better than Lemos, because the second most likely outcome in my mind is Lemos knocking out Andrade in the first round. But I'm going to go with the former champ here, and she's just going to continue to be a presence and a problem in that strawweight title picture. That's it for the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 205, Lemos versus Andrade. I've been your host, Ben Duffy, flying solo. Of course, typically, I have co-host Keith Shillan, the executive producer of the Sherdog Radio Network, here with me. I'm sure I'm much more entertaining when I have a foil, to kind of go back and forth with on this stuff. And obviously, Keith brings the X's and O's in a way that's simply not in my wheelhouse. But I certainly hope you've enjoyed my setups here, my predictions, the occasional one-liner, and making fun of a lot of fighters' nicknames. I've certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the fights. Join us on the live recap immediately after the main event on Saturday. I, along with Keith or another co-host, will be on the Sherdog YouTube page, taking your questions, your comments, your hot takes. We'll talk about all of these fights, what was good, what was bad, what was controversial. It's always a fun hangout session there, and we'd love to see you. Until then, thank you for listening, and enjoy the fights.